Um, just a few housekeeping items before we start. Please make sure to turn your phones down or off as to not interrupt the program. Thank you so much. Also to let you know, I see our panelists doing that first. Good reminder. Also just to let you know that the room is T-Coil enabled. So if you have that device, you may turn that on. If you need a headset, please let us know. And before I get to my remarks, just want to thank you all for being here. I have something written down, but I want to give a quick shout out to all of our former library employees, our former staff. If you're here and you're a former employee, please stand up for a second or wave or something. Shout out to you. So much. Thank you for coming. And I love the old pictures. I love to see all of that. And I see not everybody's here, but if you're a trustee or a Friends and Foundation member or a member of council, please stand up so we can acknowledge you for being here. Mayor and wow. Good evening and welcome to our panel discussion. It's not good now. Welcome to our panel discussion, How We Built This, part of our celebration of the 20th anniversary of the opening day of the Sands Library building. It's easy for those walking to the building for the first time to assume that Princeton Public Library always had such a beautiful home, but I soon learned after starting here in 2020 that wasn't the case, and we'll hear about that tonight. I've also learned that the we in how we built this represents not only these three panelists, but the entire Princeton community. After decades of deliberation and study, dozens of focus groups, careful consideration of multiple sites, and millions of dollars in public and private funding, Princeton decided to build a new library here in the heart of the downtown. To say that it was a transformational decision for Princeton would be quite an understatement. To hear how this came to pass, I'd like now to introduce to you Tim Quinn, our Marketing and Communications Director, who will introduce our panelists and lead this discussion. Come on up, Tim. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Jennifer. It's been a great honor to serve at Princeton Public Library these many years. I feel especially fortunate to have been here since 2000. I started in the original building on this site. I shared a windowless copier closet with a lovely septuagenarian named Jean Friedman, who rode her bike here to volunteer every day. I called the counter that I shared with her the bunker. And as I've evolved into one of the elder statespersons of the library, the emphasis on elder, I often tell new staff that as someone who was there when it all went down, I have a short list of people without whom this building would not exist. I never reveal the names on my list, but a few of them are here tonight. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like Eric Greenfeld, if he would stand, please. Eric was to be our fourth panelist, but experts in panels said having two librarians would just throw the whole program out of whack and that we'd never get out of here. So, but in any event, Eric makes my list. You know, in the old building on this site, when the air conditioning broke down, as it did often, Eric was the one who would fix it. Eric measured the space at our temporary space at the shopping center down to the 10th of an inch to ensure that our entire collection would fit while we were in our exile at Princeton Shopping Center, acres of free parking. And he was on the site of construction, for those of you who saw the film, every single day. So I think between Eric and the people, the firm we hired to manage construction of this project, that was why we were able to come in on time, the internationally famous Belgian photographer. That's why this building came in on time and on budget. So I thank you, Eric, for everything that you did to make that possible. And next time, I guess, when we're here for the 25th or 30th, maybe I'll ignore the expert on panels. So I asked our panelists to send bios, and so I'll read what they sent. Nicholas Garrison is an award-winning architect. All right, next. No. With more than 4 decades of experience designing signature buildings for communities, universities, and private secondary schools around the world. Growing up in Seattle, Nicholas cultivated a love for the natural world, which he seeks to integrate into all his designs. He earned both his Bachelor and Master of Architecture degrees at Princeton University. Following Princeton, Nicholas practiced for 10 years in Montreal, where he helped design the Canadian Center for Architecture with his future wife, Hélène Lemieux. I'm sorry, I'm not good at pronouncing foreign names. Before returning to Princeton to work at Hillier Architecture in their education studio for nearly 16 years. It was while there with his former professor, Alan Chumkoff, that he led the design team for the Princeton Public Library. Other Hillier projects included the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which we used for our backyard bird watch a couple of years back. That was one of Nick's projects, as well as more than 20 international schools around the world. From 2009 to 2022, Nicholas was a partner and design director at FX Collaborative Architects in New York City, where he led many of the firm's most prominent projects, including famously the Statue of Liberty Museum on Liberty Island and the new headquarters and youth shelter for Covenant House. Beginning in 2023, Nicholas founded his eponymous studio in Princeton, hoping that I would be able to pronounce that word, Garrison Studio, specializing in strategic design and consulting for educational institutions. A Princeton resident for the past 31 years, positive comments by Princeton Public Library users continue to make his day. Harry Levine. I'm sorry.
You said you were going to edit.
Oh, no, no need. Well, my edit is a world famous architect. Harry Levine. Before spending 16 years working on the library building project, Harry was involved in the regional school board, God bless, the Arts Council, the Youth Soccer Association, the Delaware American Greenway, and other community organizations. To say he has been a glutton for boards and nonprofits is one way to describe it. After his stint as president of the library trustees and cutting the ribbon that opened the doors of the new library in 2004, he and his wife, Ellen, bought a farm in upstate New York. They enjoyed becoming shepherds. Harry even taught spinning and knitting to young Princeton Public Library members one afternoon. But the magnet of community involvement exerted its power once again. In Cooperstown, he founded and now runs a new community foundation and is once again building coalitions and raising money to accomplish good things. His 6 grandchildren, when visiting Princeton, always enjoy running to the 3rd floor to see what treasures lay in store. Leslie Berger did not send a bio. Told me today to wing it. So, as I've said about Leslie in the past, that my catchphrase was born in the nutmeg state, moved to the nut job state. Leslie has been a librarian for a long time, starting in Connecticut. She moved to Princeton against her own will and against her better judgment. Landing in West Windsor, she worked at the State Library for a short time. Don't get her started about Jim Florio. And then did consulting and did a regional cooperative, at which point a friend and mentor invited her to apply for the interim director's job, and eventually she interviewed for the real job, and we'll hear a little bit about more about that later. Leslie, in 2006, was elected president of the American Library Association, the highest honor a librarian can achieve. And she served for 1 year as interim, anyway, whatever. She left PPL in 2016 to run her consulting firm, Library Development Solutions, and recently felt the draw of Chicago once again. So let me introduce to you the interim director of the American Library Association, Leslie Berger. Put it together. It's a good question, isn't it?
Maybe no.
All right. I wanted to start by asking each of you to share brief impressions, and knowing, Nick, that I'm asking you to sort of comment on another architect's work. Thaddeus Longstreth, I assume, is long since passed this world. But I wonder if you could offer your impressions of the building that was here on this site before this building. All three of you, briefly.
Okay, so can you hear me?
I think we just have to turn them on.
Put the green button.
This is no indication of his architectural prowess.
There we go.
Would you
All
rather?
right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. How many of you remember the Longstreth building? Well, that's great. A lot of us loved it in different ways. It was a really classic sort of modernist study of what a library should be for its time. You'll remember that the books took precedent. So the books went up to 7 feet. The windows started above that, right, on the ground floor. So when you came in, you saw books. Great. You didn't see a lot of daylight. You saw this beautiful staircase that went to the second level, right? And it was mostly white, I remember. And I just remember it feeling really well used. Even back then, it was like bursting at the seams. I'm good friends with the daughter of Henry Martin, who did that famous cartoon of the building exploding even shortly after it fell. So as a person who used the library a lot, I found it warm and welcoming, and really wanted to kind of like make it work for its next generation. And what people don't know is that we really tried to save the building. We did tons of studies of different ways to add. It's kind of like putting a winder on a camera, right? Like, how do you do this? And it turned out it just was pretty hard in a lot of different ways, and it would have meant a lot of disruption. So I love the building. I just wish we could have saved it, but as a relic, what we learned was from talking to community members, but if you're going to do it over again, make it more transparent, make it more open, make it more welcoming, especially to what we then called the John Street neighborhood, which felt like it had sort of turned its back on that part of town and sort of was more oriented towards the university side of the town. So those are kind of things that come to mind.
I had two comments. One is that building was built in 1965. The planning for the building started, by the way, in 1950, when people recognized the Bainbridge House was too small. And so for 15 years, this community studied what to do about the too small Bainbridge House. When it was designed as a 3-story building. For those of you who remember the building, it was only 2 stories, because at the very last moment, to save, I think, about $1 million, if my memory is correct, we eliminated the 3rd story. And so from 1965 onward, it was always undersized. So the community loved that building. And Jamie, are you here? Jamie Herman here? There you are. My image of that building is Jamie standing at the top of the stairs, those great stairs, in her wedding dress. I'll never forget that image. But the building itself, Nick has described it well, but it was always too small. When it came time to look at, can we add the third story and just be done with it? It turns out that wind shear codes had changed, and the building was no longer capable of withstanding winds. Although it was okay as built, if you wanted to add 50%, you had to reapply under new codes, and it was a non-starter. It wouldn't work.
We would have had to redo the entire structure.
So I didn't like the building. My first impression was that it was brown everywhere. There were dark bookshelves and dark carpeting, and the walls were sort of brown, and it just felt dead. So when I came here, we set about trying to make it feel a little bit more lively. And there was a very small community room. I guess it wasn't even a full second floor. It was only 3/4 of a second floor. There was a small little community room up there. We hadn't been doing any public programming of any sort. And the first public program we did was we invited a belly dancer to come to that small little community room. And I remember the staff looking at me like I was slightly insane. But my thought was we needed to liven this building up a little bit. So why not a belly dancer? And of course, the thought was that no one in Princeton would come to see a belly dancer. Well, it turned out that that little tiny community room was packed, standing room only. And by the time the belly dancer really got going, there were a lot of people in what little space was around the chairs also practicing their belly dancing skills. And that led me to believe and to think about how we could just kind of enliven the space. So I remember one year we bought poinsettias, so it had something other than brown. And it was a lovely building and certainly a great example of mid-century architecture, but as a library, it felt cold and sterile, and so I didn't like it.
So
why don't you give us your real opinion?
don't hold back. Harry, I'm sure that in a town whose name is synonymous with learning, that it must have been pretty easy to get a new library built once the existing building was deemed obsolete. Everyone agreed that it was a quick process, right?
Right.
When I first came here, I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Just what Princeton needs, another expert." So it was just like,
well, we all know this story. I mean, we all know that it was 15 years of studies and investigations and disagreements and letters to the editor, and yet before we started this session, David Goldfarb, who sat on the Borough Council at the time, said to me something very important, which was there were a lot of heroes in the story. And I think that's exactly true. I think that there were a lot of people who, no matter whether it was to be 3 stories and bright lights or underground or the shopping center or even Palmer Square, because we had thought about that at one point, everybody was dedicated to, hey, library services are important to this town, and somehow we're going to make it happen. We will disagree till the cows come home, yes, but eventually we will get there and we will do it. And so it's really a tribute to our community in all sorts of ways that this building stands as an example of how people can come together and do something that's good for the community.
So one of the turning points, I think, was the hiring of Leslie as the removing the interim tag. And Leslie, I think you've shared a lot about what you thought of the library as it existed, but could you talk about first of all, I'd like to ask you, did you really guarantee in your interview that you get the library built in 5 years? And could you talk about what your vision was for a new library?
I do believe I said I would get it done in 5 years. I think I was probably insane at the moment to say that, but Harry had a plan. We said we wanted to do it on that timetable. There was enough talking, and so I wanted to be part of that process, and going to do everything I could do to make sure that that happened. What was the second question?
About the vision for how the
new
library would be different from what was here.
So the vision for the new library was sort of the anti-existing library, right? So the idea of having it be transparent, right? We wanted people from the outside to be enticed by what was going on in the inside so that they would want to come in and explore. And similarly, we wanted people on the inside to not be removed from the world, but to be part of it, but in this beautiful space, communal space, where they could be part of a smaller Princeton community at that moment, but also not be disconnected from the rest of the world. So that was really important. It was also really important to not have books be the total focus of what we were doing here. Important. And collections were quite different 20 years ago than they are now. I heard from G.A., who I don't know is in the room, that there's one reference book left at the Princeton Library. Different world that we live in now, right? But the idea was that we wanted people to come together, that we felt that there was something here, something about this community that was very civic-minded, and that the opportunity for that kind of civic engagement to take place in the library was the place where it could all happen, kind of the public forum. And so we built the space in a way that invited people to come in to talk. We had meeting rooms, we had study rooms. You could do a lot of things in here that in the new building that we couldn't do in the previous building. And so it was really kind of, the Henry Martin cartoon is actually quite apt, right? We were trying to explode what the traditional image of the library was, and in its place recreate what we thought would be the library of the future. And I think we were pretty successful at doing that. Thanks.
So, Nick, can I call you Nick? I know Nicholas is the preferred. I've always known you as Nick. Talk about a little bit about turning that vision, how that translated into design and the process of community input that went into refining the design.
Yeah, my comment about the bumper sticker kind of relates perfectly to the outreach that we did. So, you ask people in a town like this what they want the library to look like, you get a lot of different opinions. And they really ranged from a very kind of traditional Cape Cod shingle style library that you might see in a quaint New England town to, the most dynamic, modern, piece of sculpture that you could imagine. People had strong opinions about that. So one of the tasks really was to try to find the middle, not the middle ground necessarily, but the right amount of old and new to kind of make this work for this town. The good thing is we were starting from a point of view where there's a modern building here. Had there been a very old traditional building here, we might have been boxed into thinking differently. But we really wanted something dynamic, and I think the compromise was partly driven by cost. I mean, you can't actually build a glass building for the same price as a brick building. They're more expensive, right? So I wanted more glass. But the realities are you can only build so much of the modern stuff. It takes a lot of money, and it's hard to defy gravity, honestly. That costs money. So being sensible, finding the right balance between open and closed, solid void, amount of glass. We kind of came up with that porch idea, which was to really engage the town on that side, but also to kind of turn the corner and engage Heights. You know, we don't talk much about it now, but there was a huge push by private citizens to make this plaza possible. You know, to kind of like push the borough to think about how to develop this piece of land so that it would work for the library, but also work for the town. And at the time, the first design, the entrance to the library was not on the corner. We didn't have a plaza to speak of. We had the front door pretty much on access with the back door, which kind of made sense because you would come in, you either go to the community room, you go to the library. But once we were pretty much assured that we would have something of a plaza, things gravitated to the corner. And my friend Harry and my boss at the time, Alan, hatched up this scheme of having a tower on the corner. And it wasn't really my idea, but I did what I could with it. So just to say that there's lots of input, a lot of different ideas, a lot of different personalities and people that make something like this work, right down to the choice of furniture and carpet and lighting. So it's a team effort and involved everybody.
Well, you know, Nick, part of behind every good architect, I think, is a good client.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we did do is instead of, when it came time to figure out, well, what kind of a library building do we need? We formed a committee. Nick Wilson headed it up. It was called the Blue Sky Committee. And its charge was to describe what the community wanted in terms of library services, not building, services. And so it produced about a 20-page report that described what the community really wanted. Not one of the items was physical. We turned to Nick now, who then could take that document and say, okay, I can create what you have described. And so I think part of the success of this building is we started at a very broad level about how to use the building or how to use a facility. Never once thinking about a building. Would you agree?
Agree, totally. And then there are these serendipitous things that, you know, it makes sense to put the children's library on the ground floor. Most libraries, you know, are sensitive to strollers. And but by the time we put the community room here and the help desk and the loading dock, there was not enough room for children's life. So, you know, you make lemonade. You put them on a floor and you honor them differently and you figure out a way to get them up there and you create an outdoor space that they can connect to so they're not feeling completely bunkered, right? And so lots elements of the library evolved through those kinds of forces.
I think one of the other things that was really important as our project evolved, it also led to the evolution of the plaza. So those of you who've been in town for a while may recall that that was a surface parking lot and had substandard parking spaces, by the way. So there's a lot of accidents taking place in there. And once the borough decided that and found the opportunity to get funding to designate that an area in need of redevelopment, there was this kind of yin-yang thing that was going on. So, you know, we might not have put windows over there had that plaza not evolved. And so I think each of our projects was informing the other and ended up with this beautiful civic space in the middle of town that we didn't imagine when we first started planning this building.
Well, and a lot of people here in the audience tonight were responsible for that. The library was one, frankly, small element in it, but we were delighted when the response to what we were doing was to expand that plaza into something that was a real community asset.
It was a pretty dynamic period for this town. To think of both this project and that project all got built in a very short period of time. When you consider how long it takes to do a lot of things here, right? So this project pushed that project, and that project pushed this project, and they had to have the parking ready when this building opened. That was part of the deal. So they had to get going, find the developer again. So in a very short period of time, historically speaking, for Princeton, this project happened.
So we'll talk about parking later. If you
By the
don't
way,
mind.
parking,
Part
the
two,
first-
parking, part
Don't
two.
mind.
was the first slide in
Everything,
my introduction.
everything goes back to parking. So Nick mentioned the money part of this, and so we got $6 million from the borough and township combined. I think it was a little under 2 million from the borough and a little over 4 million. So a $6 million library would look a lot different than what we're sitting in, which is an $18 million library. So I want to go back to a time when Leslie, Harry, and I drove down to Trenton, and back in the quaint day when there was local journalism that had, printed products, and we went down to the Trenton Times to make the case for private support for the building, which seemed like a radical idea at the time for a capital campaign. And we went there specifically to get them to write a story about the capital project, and also for editorial endorsement. And we were successful. And when the story came out, the writer, the reporter, took a really lighthearted approach to the story, that he did like a MasterCard priceless thing, where he said cost of a book $5, cost of an ebook whatever, and then naming rights to the Princeton Public Library priceless. Well, not priceless if you have $5 million hanging around, blah blah blah. So they made kind of a joke of it, and we were furious. And someone read that story and talked to a member of their family, and we got a phone call from someone who was interested in buying naming rights to the building, which is why it's called the George and Estelle Sands Library Building of Princeton Public Library. So Leslie, what was it like to get that call? And if you could share your impressions of George and Estelle.
So we were getting a lot of press coverage in those days, and my husband, who I love dearly, would make a habit of bringing me the Trenton Times in the morning. We used to get it delivered, and there was a headline that says $5 million will get your name on the library. And he was chiding me for using, or for, trying to sell the library. So, I was deeply troubled that I had somehow misrepresented what we were trying to do. And I think it might have been that same day or the day after I got this call. And the Sands, George and Estelle had already contributed to the library building fund in a smaller way. But it was George on the other end of the phone, and he said to me, "So I heard that $5 million, you can get your name on the library. Is that true?" And I said, "Yes." Of course, I immediately thought he was calling to yell at me about something bad I had done. So anyway, we had this conversation, and I said, "Yes, we can." And you can. And then he said, "Well, I think Estelle and I might be interested in that." And I said, "I'll be right over." I think I called Harry immediately and said, "I can't believe this just happened." But yes, they did. They had had a conversation prior to that, and they were our largest donor for this building. And it was a transformational gift, because that gift allowed us to go to others and say, "Here's where we are, here's what we need, can you help us out?" And this community came together in a way that was truly extraordinary to provide private funding for this building.
And for Leslie,
Can I just add something?
please, I was going to ask you what that did for our fundraising, but you can interject whatever you want.
I'd like to do it now.
Harry,
Is that okay?
Yes.
Harry,
As if you have to ask.
everything's on the table.
One of the issues was once we knew what we wanted to build, and by the way, the original budget was only $12 million, I think. We knew that we had to build a capital block of enough money, not only to build the building, but then to maintain the building. And so how do we go about doing that? Our first stop, and it was many stops actually, not just the first stop, was to Borough Council and Township Committee to get them to buy into the municipal project, because we knew that a completely privately financed project was way beyond our scope. At the time, the Friends of the Library were very successful in raising $50,000 a year. And remember, we had more zeros on that than we could have imagined. So we went to government first, and we said to them, we had to lay out a plan that allowed them to say yes. And it prohibited them from saying no. And the way to do that was to say to them, if you give us $1, we'll go out and get another $1. And I think, David, are you the only one here that was on one of those?
Luckily,
But I think it was, you were persuaded by that at least, so and I think others were as well. So we knew we had 6. Now we had to figure out how to get the rest of it. We went to fundraising consultants, and we said that we interviewed people from Connecticut and people from Westchester and people from Manhattan, all people that raised lots of money. And they all looked at our history of funding, and they said, well, maybe you can raise $500,000, maybe you can raise $1 million. So we kept looking for different fundraisers, and we found somebody local who came in, and at the interview we said, well, how much do you think we can raise in our community? And Betty Sapo, local person that you may know from Hopewell, said, well, how much do you need? And I thought, well, that's the one we want. We'll hire her. And we hired her, we hired Jamie, and we had a $12 million budget. When George came in with Estelle, and they said, hey, we can do 5, what we did was we leveraged that again. Mm-hmm. And we said, okay, of the $12 million construction budget, how about if we only use half of your commitment, remember? Mm-hmm. And the other half we're going to put away for that maintenance fund, because you've gotten us so far along the line that we think we can now really do a job. And so stacked by, level by level by level, we were able to successfully build the capital needed to do this.
And Nick, how did having that extra money influence design choices that were made? Did it make it easier, or?
So my recollection, and I could be wrong, is that extra money had nothing to do with this construction of this building. It had more to do with the long-term maintenance. So we still had a $12 million construction budget, and that construction budget included everything, right? The lighting, research. So what people don't know is that the money, so we had a pocket of private money from the foundation, the foundation at the time, Friends.
Yeah, it was called the foundation.
So there was some of that money was privately raised and some of that was public. So we said, well, let's divide it into a couple of pockets. So what we did is we put the public money into what we did, which was the shell of this building. And we took the private money and we went out and did things like bought the furniture, had a design build contract to do the lighted furniture that's still in the front, the maple. All of those light fixtures from Copenhagen were a single contract with a company called Louis Paulson, where they sold us them directly, and then we handed them to the contractor to install them. So we cut out all the middlemen, middle people, and managed to put in $50,000 worth of lighting, which would have cost us maybe $300,000 on the open market. So we managed the public construction with a pretty simple part of the building. All the stuff that we touched and felt, we managed ourselves and controlled, which is really important in public buildings, right? For those of you who've been in public buildings and been disappointed with the finishes or the final results, it's because that's always the low bid. And New Jersey's got very strict laws about bidding, and so we divided it up. And I think that was hugely important for making this building feel more expensive than it was for its time, more luxurious than it was. People were amazed that this is 12 million. It's like, sounds like a lot of money, but 65,000 square feet. Even back in those days, that wasn't a lot.
So
Proud of that maneuvers with everything.
Yeah, we were pretty strategic.
So with the gift from the Sands jumpstarting our community cornerstone campaign, and we were able to move to the shopping center, demo the existing building that Leslie hated, and there was a site remediation that had to be done by PSE&G that required a lot of politicking, and they were very successful in completing. We had an art committee that did a real thorough job of ensuring that we had commissioned works of art that were, that were all privately funded. So then we'll bring us up to the 4/24/04, 20 years ago today. Leslie, I don't know whether Harry or Nick were here. I don't remember, and they didn't show up in any of the photos, which seems odd because future Mayor Liz Lambert showed up in the photos over there. So what do you remember about that day, about 4/24, Leslie?
An incredible sense of excitement that we had actually accomplished what we set out to do, and that it was in reality even more beautiful than what we saw in the sketches and the renderings that we had used in our planning. I felt exhaustion because we had spent, how many years were we at the shopping center? 24 months or so? Yeah. Eric and I shared some lovely space in the basement of the Princeton Shopping Center, along with some roaches and other assorted vermin. That we had actually made that into a successful kind of mini model of what we were trying to do here, and hoping that what we planned in our thinking for this building was actually going to work. And then just the look of joy on people's faces when there's a photo over there of a kid running through the door, like wanting to be the first one to come in, and this moment of true joy as people walked in here and they just looked around and couldn't believe what they saw.
Okay, people didn't walk in here. What happened was, if you remember, we trained a dozen staff members to give tours, and they were all waiting at the front, inside the front door. So when you cut the ribbon, the doors open, one by one tours would be taken. Tour guides would take people in. And the next thing you do, you cut the door, the ribbon, the doors open, and people rush right past all the tour guides, went right to where they wanted to go.
Right, and they knew where they wanted to go.
Yeah, it was.
That was the other thing that was so amazing. Wow, we did a really good job.
Yeah, the whole notion of the big worry was the bottleneck at the elevator for the third floor, right? People didn't even know it was there. They just went up the stairs, and they still do. So when they can, it's still the right way to get up and down. So it's great.
So this is a pretty trite question to ask an architect, and there are several other architects in the room I know, but Nick, could you talk about what it's like to come in here and see people interact with the spaces that you created with members of the community and with Leslie and Harry and 100 other people whose names would take all night to. Could you talk about that feeling that you get?
Well, you sort of constantly have this true pride and being part and helping to make something part of the community in which you live. So, of all the buildings I've ever done, this is the only one that with the consequences of every minute. And like when I do come in here, I'm the usual architect, like that light fixture needs to be fixed, that needs to be moved, that needs to. So I'm kind of the mom, and I would tell anybody because of course that would make. But I do see just like this tremendous variety of spaces and variety of types of people using different kinds of spaces in different ways, and that really warms my heart because that was the goal. The goal is, not everybody learns the same way, not everybody can stand noise, not everybody can, so that you can find a place that's comfortable for you in this building, and I hear that from people when I ask them, and that makes me very happy.
The other things I think is really important about the way you design this building is its flexibility. So we now have transformed the second floor. That was in 2016, 17.
2016, 17.
Thank you. And you can see that the building is designed to be updated and changed along with the way people use the space. And so you need to get busy on the first and third floor. They need some updating, but that's the beauty of the building, that we don't have to take down expensive walls and rebuild them because the space is completely open, flexible, and easy to redesign and reconfigure.
And I just one architect, another shout out to Andrew Berman for the second floor, and that space was done on a really tight budget. It's extraordinarily beautiful, and it works. What I can see, it's super, super, super popular. So you took the kind of foreign child of the library, because the ground floor had all the go-to stuff, and the third floor had all the kids stuff, but the second floor was the unloved middle child. But generally speaking, it was like less imaginative, I would say. And now it is, I think, the heart and soul of the building. And that makes me really, really, it's impressive.
And it really is indicative of how things have changed over time, right? So from 2004, where we had a fairly sizable reference collection, I don't know how many books were in that collection.
10,000.
Thousands, right? And then to the point where the staff was telling me probably back in 2014 or so that there wasn't enough space, or the space wasn't working well. And I said, okay, how about we get rid of some of those reference books that people aren't using anymore? And they were sort of appalled. And then I said, can you go do the dust test and report back to me? And I had a very willing partner in Erica, and it turned out that's why we only have one now, because we were Googling and finding information online and through databases that we had subscribed to. So being able to shift gears and rethink how the space needs to work as the way people use libraries and get information across is exceptional. Not many libraries would have thrown out all those reference books. Yeah.
I want to just add one note of caution for the community, and that's that we all refer to this as the new library. But folks, it's 20 years old. And with the rate of change, the technology that we're seeing today, please remember that it took 15 years in 1950. It took 15 years in 1989. Think forward 15 years from today. If we don't invest in our library services in this town, starting now, imagine how old this library is going to feel 15 years from now. So I just want to leave us with a sense of responsibility for keeping and maintaining the kind of quality services that we enjoy right now. Sorry for the downer.
No, thank you. I didn't even have to ask the question about the future.
The
So
second floor is proof that future doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You can take bites out of this building and make it work, and keep going with it, and keep making it happy. So keep going.
thank you. So I want to thank our panelists. It'd be great if you gave them a round of applause. question, who's going to come to a panel discussion about the building of a library? And we found out. So we now have time for questions, and I'd like to start with any of the alums who are here who would like to share a memory or ask a question. And I'm going to ask you to use one of the microphones that my colleagues are passing.
I guess it was graduation. It's on graduation day, 1973. I was interviewed with Bob Staples, and he said at that time, I was a fresh graduate of the University of Illinois Graduate School, and he said, Eric, we think this is a great time to be joining the Princeton Public Library because we're planning an expansion of this building. And I thought, hey, I just got out of graduate school. That's terrific. Well, after 25 years, I got kind of nervous that this wasn't going to happen, but because of you three and an awful lot of folks in this community donating money and ideas for this building. And it happened. But the second part of that narrative is walking down Nassau Street. People don't know who I am. They haven't known who I am for 20 years. But they talk about the library, and I eavesdrop. And they like this building. They like the staff. They like the services. And it's just a delight to eavesdrop on those comments. Thank you.
Any staff, alums who would like to share a
Can
thought
I share just a
before we open it up for questions? Gail.
I don't need a microphone.
Yes, everyone needs a
I
microphone.
know, my voice is pretty loud. So one of the interesting things I think is when I started here in 1987, I've recently retired. When you closed the building at night and you went out into the parking lot, as Leslie mentioned, it was dark. It was creepy because there was nothing going on downtown because there were no stores really. There were no coffee shops. There was only one ice cream place. There were no public bathrooms. We were the public bathroom for everybody. But when you went out at night and went to your car, you didn't see a soul. And now when you go out of the building at 9 o'clock, the plaza's full. There are babies in strollers. There are dogs. It feels very European. People are out having their coffee. They're out meeting their friends. We have the dancing during the summer. It really is much more alive than it was probably the first 10 years that I was working here. So, and I think it's due to us, the library, more than the plaza, more than the borough, the township, the combined, whatever. I think it's because of us, because of you, because of what you did.
I think we can take credit.
Yeah, we'll take
We're credits too. Now we'll open it up for questions. Anyone have a question for our panelists?
It's not a question, but this is a little bit about you, Tim, and that day that the library opened. I think your son, George, was first through the door.
Now
I
Gloria.
was behind with my granddaughter, Mary, who really had to go to the bathroom so badly. So, to your point, right, the bathroom. He still has a claim to fame, and this is simply the best library in the world.
Yeah.
Any architects have a question about FFE?
Not an architectural question, actually, even though I am an architect. I don't know if you intentionally avoided the topic, but Nick and I were talking about it before the meeting. So the decision to site a library here rather than out into the township. And that's my recollection of the most difficult piece. And I think, I guess I'll telegraph what I hope the answer is. I hope that the people who are doing the planning all knew that this is where the library belongs. And it was mostly a question of figuring out how to navigate the politics in the community. But was that the case, or was it a really internal debate as well, where there were people who are decision makers who were disagreeing.
David, you want to know the truth or you want to know what you want to know? I will tell you, as one who not only participated in that discussion, but encouraged it and basically lit the fire that it flamed from. It was a legitimate debate because there was the access at the shopping center versus the difficulties that people saw from it of access here. There was also the political issue of, are you going to build it in one community, or one municipality or another municipality? So there were legitimate concerns. I think ultimately the community came to the right decision for, as you thought, but it was after taking a good hard look at the positives and the negatives of both options. And there were some other options too, which
I had probably 25 plans in my closet in my office for places this library could be.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember that there are things that kind of fell into place that helped keep it here, right? So the promise of the borough to provide parking within a certain distance of this building was huge. So I remember interviewing for this job. And I remember my very first slide was the international symbol for parking. Because I said to the then board that I was interviewing with, I said, we can talk about libraries all day long, but this is the issue that's going to drive the project. And this is the issue. And I started this kind of analysis of how to solve the parking before I started thinking about the building, right? Because it's the cart before the horse. You had to figure that out. The other thing was in the kind of the favor of keeping it somewhere else was just the simple math and logistics of you keep this building open and perfect and working until the new library, which is perfect and working and functional, is ready, and you just move. So that's really a tough thing to overcome, and it was a serious discussion. Why not do it that way? It just saved everybody a lot of heartache instead of 2 years in the shopping center.
But you know what was really great about that shopping center? So you may recall that before we moved to that space, it was a bookstore. I don't remember the name of it.
Encore.
Thank you. And it had a cafe, and it had some space we created for programming right out in the open. And there had been a fair amount of discussion about whether we should have a cafe in the library or not. And I think there was some sentiment that cafe didn't really belong here. But then people started using that shopping center cafe when it came to the library. Then the question became, are you sure it's big enough? Are you gonna have enough seating in there for us? So it allowed us to model some of what we wanted to do in this building. And that was a great opportunity to do that, except for the basement where Eric and I had to sit.
And you also had some display shelving you could reuse. That,
we used display
was a different model of
Yeah,
shelving
yeah,
for
just
libraries.
bookstore shelving.
I just kept thinking about my friend Jean Friedman, who I shared the bunker with, who rode her bike here every day into her 70s, and thought that's a model for me for a library user of the future. So, I mean, I still have scars about parking, and I think everything relates to parking. If you name a subject, I get related to parking. And it was, as I remember it, difficult to convince people that people would walk and bike to the library if we provided racks for them to park their bikes and another experience like a plaza. And I think too that what I didn't ask the panel was about the economic impact of having a library downtown. We were sort of in the sort of post-mall times where people were driving out to Route 1 and the merchants were talking about loss of foot traffic. And, I think that the not to speak for our panelists, but I think that they were convinced that we could be an economic generator for the downtown, that there were people who in Princeton who, whether they walked or biked or drove, they might not come downtown unless it was to go to the library. And I remember Leslie making a speech once where she said, you know, there are two places in downtown Princeton where you can go and there's no expectation of you spending any money. And that's Palmer Square and the library, right? You know, there weren't robust public spaces back then. We had a big flat parking lot. So anyway, other questions? We're rambling here. Janie.
So I'm Janie Herman. I still work here. I came here in 1999, intending to stay 2 to 3 years before going home to Canada, and I'm still here. So I guess it must be a great place to work, as evident. And over my years, I've had many roles here, but when the library opened, at that time I was technology training librarian, and my biggest memory of that day is people being so amazed because we had this giant touchscreen television smartboard in the technology center. I had to spend all day just showing people that you could write on it with a digital marker and wipe it off. And it was like endless fascination. I just spent the whole day, people just wanted to play. That was like the most amazing thing. And then I got to go with Bob Keith shopping. We made what we called a gadget garage. It was like really innovative at the time. It got written up everywhere. And Bob and I just basically got to go on a spending spree to find all the best gadgets that we could find that people might want to use, scanners and cameras and everything that was like, you know, so new. And that was really an exciting time. But I also just want to share a memory. It was not from that day. I actually thought it was, and I was reminded it was from later. And I always remember it. So May was the actual official big opening of the library with all the dignitaries. And, you know, one of the people, I mean, I guess both, you know, to get to here, there had to be consensus between the township and the borough that we stay here. And so, of course, Marvin Reed and Phyllis Marchand are the people who did that consensus. And I distinctly remember Phyllis singing a song that day. Does anybody else remember? It's that she came up to do a speech, and instead of doing a speech in Phyllis fashion, she sang us a song to celebrate the opening of the library. And I just remember that just being so incredibly delightful. And then everybody rushing in the building again, a second time. We cut the ribbon, you know, a second time, and the same effect happened, and everybody just running for that staircase like they couldn't wait to get in. And it's just been a great 25 years ever since.
Yeah, Joyce Carol Oates was one of our programs that day, and there was a young PHS student named Ross Erkin who came to listen to Joyce Carol Oates, and we hosted Ross Erkin last year after his first novel was released. And I sent him a picture from that day and just said, you don't know me, but here's a photo of you and your dad, Irv Erkin, at the Joyce Carol Oates program. He wrote back and said how he remembered that and how influential it was to him. It was just he was very grateful. So Council President Sachs had her hand up, I think.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I have a different memory than Leslie of the old library. Because I was a child at Community Park School, and I had what was unusual in the 70s, a working mom, and I came to the library every day after school. It was a haven for me, a safe space in the midst of what was some family dislocation then. I think I knew where every single book was in the children's room and read them all hundreds of times. And then, of course, in middle school, I came and did what people did then, which was to revise the World Book Encyclopedia to do your book report. And when I heard that, when I knew that library was going to be torn down, I felt really personally devastated, and I just couldn't imagine that any library could possibly be better than that library. But in fact, for all the reasons that you have articulated here, it carried that tradition and the spirit and the essence of what that library provided to the community, and and expanded it and made it so much more. And it truly is the community's living room. And also, I just want to thank you all because, you know, Princeton is going through another period of tremendous change. And took us many years to consolidate. And as you have, you know, elaborated here tonight, every change that we make takes much longer than in other places. And we seem to feel very scary and are resistant to them. And you were really forerunners in showing what redevelopment can do and bring to a community, however much anxiety it may bring in the moment. And so thank you for setting that example. I also want to say that the current council is very excited about finally, hopefully creating a satellite arm of the library at the shopping center so that we can hopefully have the best of both worlds finally. And I also just wanted to thank Tim and Kim and Jennifer and all of the library employees and Jamie, who are more than just library employees. They are really an integral part of our community and community building, and they help knit the fabric of our community together. And so thank you all very much.
Any other thoughts, questions? I think that there are a couple pieces of cake back there if anyone hasn't had it. Oh, wait, another question. Good.
I just have a
Hi,
detail
Barbara.
that I remember about electrical outlets. If you look around, you'll see some electrical outlets. And I remember when Eric was obsessing over whether there were enough of them. And then I'm remembering the power outage for 3 days. And how, was it 2006?
It was Hurricane Sandy, right?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And I remember the library was the haven. And it has been that many times.
Because we had all those power.
They were huddled around.
Leslie was safe in Florida then. Ever since then, the director goes on a vacation and something happens. Not quite that big, but so. Anything else? Anyone? You see our little exhibit over there? Notice the photo there in from next to one with Janie. That's future Mayor Liz Lempert and her daughter Ella, who is going to be graduating from Stanford next month or soonish. So anyway, Liz, a virtual unknown then in town, just happened to got the word of mouth that the library had opened, and who knew that she'd be mayor 9 years later. Anyway, her mom, who served as mayor, did probably. So, another question, observation? Yeah.
It's a question. So you mentioned that planning for the future and expanding and all of that. What do you envision for this building for those next 20 years of planning? Can we go up another floor? We can't go out on the plaza. What do you?
Well,
What do you see
Perfect
happening?
You know
handoff.
what? That's the way to end it. That's up to the
What do
community.
you envision?
Exactly.
I think that might be a question for me.
I do want to make a big shout out to the committee that put all the lovely artwork in this building. So in addition to the lighting that I referred to and some of the furniture, without that artwork, this building wouldn't have had the soul that it did when it opened, right? So those lovely sculptures, the amazing mosaic, even Louis the Swan, which I really love, are kind of pieces of this building that didn't exist 2 years before it opened, and they've become kind of beloved members of the community as well. So I think they warmed the building up as much as anything else. And I think it's something that really amazed people, that in addition to all the space and all the other stuff, there was this beautiful artwork, and pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was fun.
Thank you. And yeah, looking forward, a lot of you know that we completed a 5-year strategic plan. And in it, we certainly heard a lot from the community about what they love about the library currently and what they'd like to see. And pretty much all we heard was we want more, more of the same and in more access across the community. And I did hear the panelists when they mentioned there's a slight mention of the first and third floor. Fear not. Actually, in about a month or so, you will see the third floor looking very different. We're doing a complete furniture refresh. Most of the furniture on that floor is original to 20 years ago. So come back in a month and see what that looks like. We're also currently raising money to build a STEAM studio on the third floor, and we're really excited about that. Also in the strategic plan, we are looking at doing some studies to see how the usage on the first floor has changed in the last 20 years. The pandemic certainly gave us a glimpse into how people want to use our spaces and how they can be used in all the different ways that people want to access materials. And you know what, after the pandemic, everybody came back and then some. So we just want to look at different ways we can utilize the space and make it even better. So that's to come. I just want to end by thanking everyone for coming here. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for so much time. Give them one more round of applause. Thank you to our current staff, of which none of this could happen. Let me tell you that today. All day, there have been some people who are here since early this morning, and pretty much all during the day, we pivoted all day long, as we tend to do, and we were grabbing people who, you know, I think Susan back there, she's our CFO, but she was cutting cake along with several others. But thank you all to all the staff. We couldn't do any of this without you. And last but not least, thanks to Tim Quinn, who spent a lot of time putting this together. And thank you, Tim.
That's okay. You haven't had it.